Welcome to the Legislative Post-Audit Committee. I would like to remind everybody to turn off your devices. And I would like to thank Braden, Heidner, and Lowe for the lunches today. Very much appreciated. I think they stepped out, but thank you. Committee, we'll go ahead and start with the first audit, Capers 3. Kate, is this your first time presenting to the committee?
First time presenting a full audit. I presented a limited scope, I think a couple years ago.
Well,
so, yeah.
Good to see you.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I'm here to present the audit reviewing the Capers 3 retirement plan, which was approved last April. The audit question for this was, how does the Capers 3 plan compare to other retirement plan options on key metrics? And we'll get into the details in a little bit, but the short answer to that question is that Capers 3 generally gives employees less flexibility, requires them to share some financial risk, and provides lower benefits than other plans we evaluated. I'll note that this report has a lot of information that I won't have time to get especially in the background sections, but of course, after the presentation, I'd be happy to answer any questions about that material. So we'll go ahead and start briefly on page 3. And generally, the way public retirement plans work is that employees make regular contributions to their plan, usually taken out as a percentage of their paycheck, and their government employer makes contributions on their behalf as well. And then upon retirement, the employee receives some kind of monetary retirement benefit. Now, there are essentially 4 broad types of public retirement plans. There's defined benefit plans, defined contribution plans, cash balance plans, and hybrid plans. And we describe each of those plans in detail on pages 3 and 4. I won't go into those now, but I will note that Capers 1 and 2 are defined benefit plans, and Capers 3 is a cash balance plan. And the way cash balance plans work will become a little more evident in a little bit when we discuss how Capers 3 works. So now at the bottom of page 4, there's some information about the different retirement plans that are available in Kansas. I'll just mention that Capers 3 is the newest tier of the Capers plan, and it covers employees hired in 2015 and onward. And at the top of page 5, there's a figure showing the breakdown of Capers membership by tier. And as it shows, Capers 3 is the largest tier in terms of active membership. There are currently about 74,000 active Capers 3 members. So now on the bottom of page 5, and then on pages 6 through 8, there's some description in more detail about the Capers plans and how they work, including the history of Capers 3. I'm just going to mention a couple things really quick. So first off, following the 2008 recession, the Capers Trust Fund experienced some significant investment losses, and Capers 3 was created shortly thereafter in an effort to help improve the sustainability of the Capers Trust Fund. And that was done by reducing costs. And the report has much more detail on all that if you're interested. Secondly, just to give a high-level overview of how Capers 3 actually works and how cash balance plans work a little more broadly. So Capers 3 members contribute 6% of their paycheck to their Capers 3 account. And employers also make contributions on behalf of those employees, and a portion of that funding is eventually credited to the employee's Capers 3 account. Those accounts then receive a guaranteed 4% annual interest rate, but the employee can receive a higher interest rate if the Capers Trust Fund, if the investments in the Capers Trust Fund perform above a threshold. And so in that way, Capers 3 members, their benefits are partially dependent on investment returns, but there's that 4% minimum. And there's much more detail about that on pages 7, 8, and 9. I'm going to jump to page 9. And here we'll get into the meat of the comparison work that we did. So the audit objective directed us to select other public retirement plans to compare to Capers 3. And in total, we selected 6 plans, 4 from other states and 2 from recently proposed bills in Kansas, and that includes KPERS 2 and the Thrift Savings Plan. Now, there's a variety of different kinds of metrics that can be used to compare different retirement plans. First, there's what we call plan metrics, which describe how the plan is structured and how it functions overall for every employee. And then there are what we're calling outcome metrics, which demonstrate real-world benefits and costs for a specific employee in a specific scenario. And we'll cover some of the important plan metrics first, and then we'll get into our estimates for the outcome metrics. So starting with plan metrics, on page 9, you can see we discuss 2 big concepts. We discuss financial risk and employee flexibility. These 2 concepts actually incorporate a variety of lower level plan metrics. This is kind of the high level version of that. And they're the 2 most important factors that we identified for comparing retirement plans and retirement plan types. Financial risk refers to the uncertainty of future retirement benefits and costs as a result of the inherently uncertain nature of investments. And this financial risk can be distributed between employees and employers. And second, employee flexibility, that refers to the degree of control and access that members have to their account. So figure 3 on page 10 shows graphically what these 2 factors look like for those 4 broad plan types. And you'll see a similar figure for KPERS 3 and the 6 plans we evaluated on page 12. And as these 2 figures show, taken together, cash balance plans like KPERS 3 involve a mixture of financial risk and employee flexibility. The employee has to share risk with the employer because their benefits are partly dependent on investment returns. And furthermore, employee flexibility for KPERS 3 and cash balance plans more broadly is fairly low because the employee doesn't have control over investments and has limited access to their account prior to retirement. And of all the plans we evaluated, Nebraska's cash balance plan is the plan that is most similar to KPERS 3 because they're both cash balance plans, and plan type is the most important factor in determining financial risk and flexibility. It's kind of baked into the type of plan. There's much more detail on how KPERS 3 compares to the other plans on pages 10 through 12, but for the sake of time, I'm going to move to page 13. And on page 13, you can see comparisons involving some more specific plan metrics. And the 3 I'll highlight here are employee contribution rates, retirement requirements, and vesting periods. The employee contribution rate, that is the percentage of the employee's pay that they contribute to their retirement plan. Retirement requirements are the age and years of service requirements that the employee is required to meet in order to receive full unreduced benefits upon retirement. And the vesting period, that is the length of time the employee must work under the plan in order to be guaranteed a benefit upon retirement. In summary, KPERS 3 has higher employee contribution rates, a longer vesting period, and longer retirement requirements than most other plans we evaluated. And we'll go now to the middle of page 14 and discuss outcome metrics. So just as a refresher, outcome metrics in this context, that refers to the real-world benefits and costs that a retirement plan gives in a specific scenario and for a specific employee. These benefits and costs impact both employees and employers. And page 14 lists the 3 outcome metrics that we evaluated for our comparison. The first there, that's replacement ratio. That's the percentage of the employee's final working salary that they receive in annual retirement benefits. And the second is total benefit value, which is the total monetary value of the employee's benefits at the moment they retire. And then the third is cost share, which shows what percentage of that total benefit value was funded from the employee versus the employer. So starting on page 15, there's a rundown of the methodology we use for estimating these outcome metrics. And in order to make these estimates, we evaluated 6 different employee scenarios that differ based on when the employee worked for the plan and for how long. So there's like I said, there's 7 plans that we looked at in total, including KPERS 3, and there's 6 different employee scenarios here for each of those plans. We had to estimate the outcome metrics using scenarios like this because unlike with what we were talking earlier with the plan metrics, these outcomes depend on real-world conditions that can vary significantly among different employees. And for that reason, there's just no way to do a universal comparison. You kind of have to look at it on a case-by-case basis. Figure 5 there, that demonstrates what the 6 different scenarios look like. And employee 1, which you can see at the bottom of the figure, that's the one that we'll be focusing on. That's the employee who works from ages 25 to 65. And we'll focus on that because that scenario essentially represents the best case for KPERS 3 and all the other plans. It's the scenario that yields the highest benefits and costs because that's the scenario where the employee is working for the longest amount of time. Now, it's important to keep in mind that these are just estimates. Pages 15 and 16 list the assumptions that we use for these estimates. Different conditions or different employee career paths could yield different outcomes. I won't go through the whole list now, but you can read them there on page 16 if you'd like. I will say that in order to do a fair comparison, we made as much as possible identical across those 6 different employee scenarios. So we kept things identical such as salary, age of retirement, and a bunch of other things that you can read about. Now the results for these outcome estimates begin at the bottom of page 16 and onto page 17. And generally, across all 6 employee scenarios, the KPERS 3 plan yields lower benefits, a lower replacement ratio, and requires employees to fund a larger percentage of their own benefits. And that's compared to that the KPERS 3 plan yields lower benefits than all or almost all of the other plans in all 6 scenarios. So starting with replacement ratio, we can look at figure 6 on page 17. And this figure shows our estimates for replacement ratio for employee 1, what employee 1 would receive compared to the other 6 plans. And as you can see, KPERS 3 provides the lowest replacement ratio of all the plans for this employee at about 54%. And the highest replacement ratio is estimated to be under Utah's hybrid plan, and that's at 86%. And the results are very similar for employee scenarios 2 through 6. KPERS 3 provides either the lowest or one of the lowest replacement ratios in all of those scenarios. And I'll note that although you can't see it in the paper copy in front of you, the online version of this report does allow you to switch between the different scenarios and see the graph for those different scenarios. On page 18, we describe the total benefit values and the cost shares for each plan. So figure 7 on page 19 shows this for employee 1. And as you can see in the figure, we estimate that KPERS 3 provides the lowest total benefit value upon retirement for employee 1. And again, this is the employee who works under the plan from ages 25 to 65. And we estimate that upon retirement, the employee's benefits at that moment are worth about $1.3 million in total, which is the lowest. And we also estimate that through their contributions and investment returns, the employee funds about 69% of that $1.3 million, which is the highest employee cost share of all the plans we looked at. And conversely, the employer funds about 31%, which works out to be about $400,000. And again, the results are very similar for the other 5 employee scenarios. KPERS 3 generally provides the lowest or one of the lowest total benefit values and has one of the highest employee cost shares compared to other plans. And just like with figure 6, the online version of this report allows you to switch between the different scenarios. And lastly, we'll just briefly cover our high-level findings from the research and survey work that we did on page 20 now. In order to better understand how retirement plans impact employee decision-making, we conducted a survey of KPERS members, we interviewed officials from some KPERS employers, and we conducted research. On the whole, our findings from these 3 pieces indicate that defined benefit plans like KPERS 1 and 2 may be more likely to help retain existing employees than other plan types like that of KPERS 3. However, the impact of retirement plan on employee hiring appears to be much smaller. And that concludes my presentation. We did not make any recommendations for this audit, but I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Any questions? Senator, I'm sorry, Representative Francis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm sorry, I got into it late, but did you do any analysis on the cost of the different programs that you used as comparisons?
The cost analysis is on page 19. That's with the total benefit value. We did the cost analysis on a per employee basis. So that is what is shown in figure 7 there. So it's the cost share. So you'll see the total benefit value for each of the plans, and this is for employee 1. And then the colored bars indicate the percentage of that total benefit value that is funded from the employee versus the employer.
Representative Francis, did you have more questions?
No, that's fine.
Okay, thank you. Committee, I would like to take a minute to welcome Senator Reddy and Representative Clifford. No, I know your name, I'm sorry. Yes. So welcome to the Legislative Post-Audit Committee. Senator Thompson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Apologize for being late. We had a little issue. Thanks for the, I got in late.
Somebody passed out in your committee.
What's that? No, some other committee, unless they passed out afterward. I saw the ambulance come rushing in there. I don't know what's going on. Hopefully everybody's okay. Quick question on Capers 3. How does it compare to what we see with plans similar to that in the private sector with regard to the employee contributions? Did you do any kind of analysis on that?
We didn't look specifically at any private sector plans, but in terms of plans similar to like a 401k or an IRA, there are 2 plans in our analysis. So the thrift savings plan, which was in a recent bill proposal, and then Oklahoma's defined contribution plan. So defined contribution plans tend to be what private sector plans look like. We didn't look at any private sector plans specifically, but those 2 plans would have characteristics very similar to private sector plans.
I was just curious as to whether they matched up because, you know, obviously in private sector, in most cases, there's not any defined benefit pension plans, let's call them, in most businesses anymore, and pretty much the private sector all goes to that, you know, employer contribution type plan. So I was wondering, you know, going forward, whether this Capers 3 allows us to manage our budget and bring the funding levels up with regard to being fully funded with regard to the pensions. Just open-ended question. I don't know if we have an answer to that.
No, thank you, Senator, and we do have Capers here, Alan, so he can answer some questions maybe. I know this discussion's been going on. I would like to understand a little bit better. You did the thrift savings in Oklahoma defined contribution. I know with thrift savings, you have to choose different plans, and depending on what you choose is the outcome of the results. So did you just take an average for all the plans, or how did you come to the numbers for the thrift savings?
Yes, so page, I think it's 16 and a little bit of 15 shows kind of our methodology for that. For the defined contribution plan, so how those work is the employee's contribution rate is constant. The employee can contribute more if they want to, but their mandatory contribution rate is constant. And same thing for the employer. The employer has a constant contribution rate that doesn't rise and fall with investment performance or anything like that. So for the Oklahoma's defined contribution plan and for thrift savings, you can see on page 16 how we did that. We assumed a 7% annual investment return across all scenarios and all plans. You're right, though, that with defined contribution plans, the employee has control over what specifically they want to do with their money, what they want to invest in. For the sake of doing fair comparison, we assumed a 7% investment return regardless of what the employee chose to invest in. But of course, different employee preferences could yield different investment results.
Thank you. And I want to dig in a little bit. So what would be the difference between the Oklahoma and the thrift savings plan? Are they allowed to just pick any instruments or equities?
Yeah, the difference would probably, I don't have the specifics here, but some differences in probably what kinds of things they're, or what options are available for them to invest in. And then there's differences in the mandatory contribution rate. So the thrift savings plan has a 6% mandatory contribution rate, just like with Capers 3. I can't remember what Oklahoma's is off the top of my head, but it's a little bit different. And the same thing for the employer side. So the guaranteed employer contribution rate is just a little different for the plans. So there's different money going in, and that can yield different outcomes.
I think this will be helpful going forward, but I do think you were a little optimistic on the salary increase, starting at 35,000 at age 25 and making 188,000 by the time they retire for a state employee.
Yes, so that is in today's money. So that $188,000 is would not be what you would make in today's money. That looks 40 years into the future, so that'd be in 26, like if we were doing it from today, it would be in 2064. So that accounts for inflation over that period, over that 40-year period. That accounts for things like promotions and just general salary increases that someone who starts potentially on the ground floor of an agency, if they work their way up over a 40-year career and end up at the top or somewhere near the top. And that is the salary schedule that Capers uses for their actuarial evaluation. So we borrowed it from them.
Okay, thank you. Committee, any other questions? Seeing none? Thank you. Thank you for the information. I think it's going to be helpful. Are there any questions for Alan or anybody from Capers? Alan, would you like to? Senator Thompson, I think, has a question for you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Alan. Revisit that question with regard to Capers 3 and that setup for those employees. Do you think it's comparable with regard to what we're seeing in the private sector? Because obviously we want to retain employees, we want to give them the benefit, but we've got to be realistic about what we're competing against. So any thoughts on that?
Certainly, thank you, Senator, Madam Chair. Capers 3, of course, by plan design, was at a time when the Capers funding difficulty was sort of at a low point. And so I think it's, by design, it's doing what it was intended to. It's cheaper for the employers. But I think one important difference between a Capers 3 member and, let's say, a 401k plan in the private sector, one, a Capers 3 member never loses what they put in. They're guaranteed 4% interest, and then they're also guaranteed a lifetime benefit when they do get ready to retire. And of course, some 401k plans, it's kind of the luck of the draw. If you're retiring when the market's up, you're in really good shape. If you're retiring when the market's struggling a bit, it's whatever you put into that 401k, and maybe your employers put in some, but it's the value at the time. Capers 3, again, never lose what you put in, guaranteed 4%, and you're guaranteed a lifetime benefit.
So it'd be like a fixed rate annuity, essentially.
Yeah, well, some similarities, okay. Yes.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair.
Comparison. Any other questions, committee? Thank you very much. Yeah. Committee will move on to the next audit, the community college athletics. Welcome, Roy.
Well, that would help for sure. Okay.
I think this is it your first time?
Yeah, so I also did a limited scope, but it's been a couple of years. This is my first full audit as well.
Wonderful. Thank you.
So thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Maury Exline, and I will be presenting a performance audit reviewing community college athletic programs and scholarships. This audit was approved in April of 2022, and it answers 2 questions. So those questions were, how much did community colleges spend on athletic programs and scholarships in recent years, and what were the sources of those funds? And the second question was, where are community college athletes from? How many have received scholarships, and how has this changed in the last 5 years? So for a little bit of background about community college athletics, first, there are 21 colleges in Kansas that participate in the Kansas Jayhawk Community College Conference athletic programs. And these colleges are mostly made up of in-state students, and they mostly receive their funding from public sources. So a little bit about athletic department spending. So in terms of athletic department spending, there are two separate categories. So athletic department spending specifically includes things like salaries and benefits, insurance, equipment, and travel. These expenditures are paid for like any other operating expenditure at a college, and so those will come out of more of a general operations account, and like I said, are paid for like any other operation. Athletic scholarships are separate from this because by law, they cannot be paid for using public funds. So instead, colleges separate some of their funds, like student fees and private funding, to use specifically for expenditures that have funding restrictions, like athletic scholarships. So this separation of funds ensures that the dollars spent on scholarships follow legal requirements. So in order to answer question 1 regarding expenditures, we started with athletic department expenditures. So we looked at 3 colleges. Those were Butler, Garden City, and Hutchinson Community Colleges. And we focused on the fiscal years from fiscal year 2018 through fiscal year 2022. We chose these 3 colleges because they had most of the 8 major sports. And those sports that we looked at were football, volleyball, softball, baseball, and as well as men's and women's basketball and soccer. So because of this, we could tell that these 3 colleges had similar size programs. They had a similar number of athletes. So it would be easier for us to compare these colleges from college to college and give you a better understanding of how they compare. However, with that being said, results are not projectable, and this is because colleges differ in the number of athletes, the number of sports that they offer, and also how they administer their athletic programs and their budgets. So for the 3 colleges that we reviewed, we found that they spent between $2.5 million and $3.3 million annually on athletic departments, and their spending generally increased over time. I'll go ahead and have you flip to page 9. We're going to look at figure 4. And this figure shows how that funding was spent. So we broke this down in 2 separate ways. The first way that we looked at this was by expenditure category, and the second way was by sport. So in terms of expenditure category, you can see that most of community college athletic department spending went towards salaries. This makes sense because personnel costs are usually a big driver for costs for department spending. And then by the second way that we split this out, we looked at sports. And you can see that football and basketball are the biggest drivers on this side for the amount of funding that is spent towards athletic departments. And this also makes sense. Specifically, football has a higher number of athletes participating, and also they have more coaches that are there to work with more athletes. So again, looking at that salaries piece, you can tell that having more people, more personnel employed for a specific sport would also be a driver for that cost being higher. So as far as determining the sources of funds for athletic department spending, we can't determine the source of funds for athletic departments specifically because departments are a general operation and they are paid for like any other general operation at a community college. So that being said, the funding will go into one pot and then that will pay for anything that comes from a general operation fund that doesn't have funding restrictions. So for the second part of this audit, we looked at athletic scholarship spending. Again, we focused in on those 3 community colleges. Again, those were Butler, Garden City, and Hutchinson Community Colleges for fiscal years 2018 through 2022. And for this part of the question, we looked at all athletic scholarships that these 3 colleges gave during these 5 years. So we found that the colleges spent between $1.1 and $1.4 million on average each year on scholarships. Student fees were the source of most of this funds for athletic scholarships at both Butler and Hutchinson community colleges, and it was actually the source for all student athletic scholarships for Garden City. So to put this into context, we'll go ahead and have you flip to page 12, and we're looking at figure 6. So to put this expenditure data from the 3 colleges that we reviewed into context, we pulled expenditure data for all colleges in the KJCCC. All colleges report on athletic participation and spending in compliance with the Equity in Athletics Disclosure Act. While this data set has some differences from what was reported to us by the 3 colleges that we reviewed, the data is similar enough to provide you some general context to be able to kind of see this in context of the entire conference. So again, looking at figure 6, you can see that despite the differences in size of a college, in the number of sports that they offer, the number of athletes that may participate in the sports at these specific colleges, they had similar spending across the conference. So with that, between 1 and 15% of total college expenditures went to athletics at all of these colleges in this figure here and throughout Kansas. And you can see there in those 3 colleges that we looked at, they are highlighted in orange in that figure. And you can see that they kind of fall right there in the middle of all of the community colleges in the conference. So the second question of this audit asked us to determine where student athletes are from and where student athletes receiving scholarships are from. So we started looking at all student athletes regardless of scholarship status. Again, we focused on Butler, Garden City, and Hutchinson community colleges for those fiscal years 2018 through 2022. And we focused in this side on 8 major sports. So again, those 8 major sports were football, volleyball, softball, baseball, as well as both men's and women's basketball and soccer. We focused on those specific 8 sports so that we could have the most similar sample of students to be looking at across colleges, so it's as similar as possible and gives you the best view of that comparison. Again, with that being said, colleges in the KJCCC differ widely, so our results are not projectable. So we found that for all student athletes, 31% of those student athletes were in-state students. This is very different than the overall student body, which is mostly in-state students at these 3 colleges. So the distribution of in-state, out-of-state, and international students remained relatively steady over time. You can see that Garden City had the most out-of-state students in general, and Butler had the least out-of-state students in general. So shifting gears, the next part of this question deals with student athletes that receive scholarships. These numbers are actually very similar to the distribution of all student athletes that we just discussed. And this is because nearly all student athletes that we reviewed had received an athletic scholarship during this time. So if you turn to page 16, the bar chart in figure 8 shows how many student athletes received scholarships during this period and where they were from. So I'm actually going to take a moment here to show you this figure in the online version of the report on our website. So this figure is interactive, so you can choose different options to update the map and see where student athletes are coming from. And this audit included a lot of data, so if you're interested in diving deeper into it, hop on over to our website. We actually have 5 interactive figures that show the data for various parts of this audit in different ways. So thank you for pulling this up. So I will first have you go to Garden City and we'll look at out-of-state students. It looks you've got that up. So you can see here that this changes the map and you can highlight where more students are coming from. So the darker colored colors are coming from, have more student athletes coming from those colleges. So you can see that over here with the out-of-state students, in terms of Garden City, we've got a lot more students coming from western states, so Colorado. And so you can see that that proximity to the western side of the state would draw in some more students from that side. And we'll go into that a little bit later as like a potential reason why out-of-state students might be coming into Kansas community colleges. So we'll move on to the next. So this is Butler for the same out-of-state students, and you can see that more student athletes are coming from Oklahoma and Missouri, and so again, that makes sense with that proximity. It's more southern, it's more over towards the east, and so there are more student athletes that might be coming in from those areas, again, just due to proximity. So we'll go to the next. We'll clear all those, and I just wanted to show you one other piece here. So we're going to isolate football specifically, and then we'll go through each of those schools. So let's first look at Hutchinson. So you can see that there are a lot of student athletes coming from down in the southeast area of the United States. So one reason that we found, talking to community college officials about this, was because a lot of student athletes that want to play community college football, there are not very many programs down in southeastern United States, and so they may come here to be able to have that opportunity to play. So this just shows why that distribution might happen. And let's look at do Garden City. So again, that's similar. We've got a lot of students coming from Florida, and we'll look at Butler. So Butler actually had a lot of in-state students playing for their football team. So this is just kind of a distribution so you can see how all of this information works. So if you are interested, please feel free to hop on over to our website and you can play with all of that data. And it cuts up the data in lots of different ways, so you'll be able to isolate by sport, by year, all of those different ways of looking at it. So like I said, there are multiple interactive figures on our website throughout this audit, so you can see all of the data however you are interested in viewing it. Thank you. So most scholarship dollars went to out-of-state student athletes. The one anomaly here was that Hutchinson Community College actually had most of their dollars going to in-state students during this period of time. So again, to provide some context, we looked at student residency at all 21 colleges in the KJCCC for their participants in those same 8 sports. So we did this using publicly available rosters for each school in fiscal year 2022. There are a few limitations with this data that we discuss on pages 17 and 18 if you are interested, but most importantly, this information is self-reported and it may not be kept up to date throughout the seasons. This is just a snapshot in time. However, we conducted reliability on this data and found it to be reasonably reliable to offer some broader context to the conference colleges. I'll go ahead and have you turn to page 18. We'll look at figure 10. Again, this is an interactive figure, so if you go online, you would be able to toggle through all of those different schools, sports, years. There's many different ways to cut up this data, and you'll be able to change the map and see where most of these student athletes are coming from across the KJCCC. So similar to Butler, Garden City, and Hutchinson community colleges, about 31% of student athletes playing those 8 sports that we reviewed across the KJCCC were in-state students. Most students were out-of-state or international students. So we were interested in why this trend might be, so we talked to community college officials to better understand why student athletes may be largely out-of-state and international students. And what we found talking to colleges, they told us that colleges compete for a limited number of athletes. So there are 21 community colleges in Kansas, or 21 colleges that compete in Kansas Jayhawk Community College athletics. And then there are also universities, and then there are also other states and places close by where students might be able to go to play whatever sport they so choose. So in order to get the best athletes, a lot of times community college officials told us that they have to look outside of the state to find competitive athletes to fill their rosters. Further, some schools have students from other states that are just closer to them. So as we saw on that map, you'll see lots of students from Colorado coming into those western state or those western colleges, and then the same thing happens on other areas of the state as well. And then finally, some states don't have community colleges, so students will come here so that they have an opportunity to play community college athletics, and we saw that again in that map, showing that there are a lot of students from, say, Florida and Georgia coming to Kansas to be able to play. So that concludes our findings for this audit. We did not make any recommendations, but I am open for questions.
Thank you, Maury. Representative Williams.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for your thorough efforts on this. I did request this audit, as it stated, and my goal in requesting this audit was to find out exactly where these students were from. And community colleges are heavily funded by property tax, which is a huge burden on 19 counties that their surrounding counties do not pay for. And I could go on and on about that. So I will say, and I did share, that I am disappointed that I can't extract from this audit that who was in my resident county and who was outside of my resident county. But I do have some questions because I did pull up the taxpayer accountability self-reported websites for the community colleges, and I found 2 out of the 3. And so I wanted to turn to page 17 and ask you some questions on that.
Absolutely. I do want to note that the information that you're asking about, the in-county versus out-of-county, we do have that information. We didn't include it in the audit because it was different than the other information that we were able to get from the colleges, but I do have that if you are interested.
Could you provide that for the committee, please? That would be great. Thank you.
Yes, I mean, because from my perspective, that was the one thing, is to try to figure out, because, I mean, let's be honest about this. The statute says that scholarships for community colleges cannot be expended for out-of-resident students. That's students that are outside your paying district. They can use fees if the fees are approved by the local trustees and the student body. I have no way to know if that happens every single year or not. But they shouldn't be using tuition. They shouldn't be using any state funds. They shouldn't be using any of our local property tax. It's unlikely that that's necessarily what's happening. But let's look at page 17, because the data that I'm finding online is very different from what's been provided on 17. And it could be my quick calculations were inaccurate, and that's great. I'd love to have the correction. Heather can probably do it later for me. But on this page here, it shows that on the first diagram, figure 9, it shows that Garden City had somewhere below 60, or I'm sorry, had somewhere on, let's look at 2022, somewhere below 60% of their students were out of state, correct? Or am I reading it wrong?
So this is the percent of scholarship dollars awarded to out-of-state athletes. So this is not specific to the number of student athletes.
No, that's what I'm saying. I may have misspoke, but that number, that little point in time in 2022 represents the percentage of students that are out of state that receive scholarship, correct?
Percentage of dollars awarded to them. So not the number of students, but
Yes, okay,
Yes.
that's that's actually what I'm looking at, percentage of dollars. But is that saying that about 60% or a little bit less than 60% of the scholarship money is used for out of state?
yes.
Okay, so just kind of, and I don't know who's right and who's wrong, but the self-reported, because it's required by law, required by statute that the schools report. But Garden City reported for 2022, if I did my math calculations correct, that they spent $825,368,000 of just over $1 million total dollars of all scholarships for their athletes. That puts them at 84% of total athletic scholarships out of state, not 60. So there's a huge discrepancy in your numbers. I'm not sure why, but somewhere there's a reporting difference of that, and that makes a difference in how we interpret this. The same thing is true with Butler County, looking at their numbers, which, by the way, I do have to say that if you go to Butler County's website, and I'm very impressed by their taxpayer and student transparency data, and how they format it. It's excellent. Didn't find anything for Hutchinson, FYI. So I don't know if I just couldn't click on it and it just gave me nothing, and I didn't find it. But maybe Heather can speak to it. But the same thing happened with Butler County, that it says that it's less than, the number is different, the percentage that is about 61%. And so I just thought maybe you could specify how you came up to those calculations.
So those, I can't speak to what is specifically reported in the taxpayer transparency database, because we looked specifically at athletic scholarships. So only athletic scholarships. We did not look at academic scholarships or service scholarships, any other type. And there can be athletic service scholarships. That is something that colleges do award. And so with that being said, I don't know, I can't speak to whether or not the information that we received from the colleges would be falling into the same exact category, because we were very specific about what we wanted. And it may be something different than what is required for that taxpayer transparency database. However, with that being said, I will say what we asked for was for all student athletic scholarships for students on certified rosters at all three of those colleges for the 5 years. And so there is, and that did not include service scholarships. So it may be different, is what I'm saying. That may account for something.
Representative Williams.
Okay, actually, what I'm looking at is only athletic scholarships. It is self-reported, but I would say, I guess thank you for providing us the in-resident numbers. That would be very, very helpful, as best as you're able to provide those. But then secondly, it kind of surprises me that the data didn't get compared to the data transparency to see if they were accurate. Or, I mean, not even if they're accurate, because you're doing it accurate based on your data. Is theirs accurate based on, and just comparing the two, and those two things didn't happen. And now I'm left with discrepancies between their self-reported percentages just based on athletes, not other scholarships, and then what you provided. And I guess I'm a little disappointed, because I don't know what to do now with that. So thank you.
So maybe we could have you go back and take a look at what's posted online and reach out to the three colleges and find out, do a little bit more investigation for the discrepancy, if that would be okay.
Yeah, I will. I'm not sure what the...
A representative from the Community College Association is here. Maybe she could explain any differences between what's reported on the database and what they give us.
She's up next, so thank you.
I will say, as far as looking into, we did a lot of reliability on the data that we did receive. There are lots of different things to do reliability-wise. We did do a lot of reliability on the data that we received, though.
Representative Probst.
Thank you. And I'm not familiar with the self-reported transparency, but I feel like it's important to note that you and I both know that these self-reported transparency databases often don't get updated. They don't get kept updated, and they often don't contain accurate information. So there might be a discrepancy, but I know I'm more likely to trust the rigorous controls of an audit more than I am a self-reported database, which we've historically had issues with.
Representative Williams.
I mean, that's a fair point, and we are very partial to legislative post-audit, so I don't want to appear as if there's any distrust in the audit, but there is still a discrepancy, and the reporting data that I've seen for the community colleges are done annually, and if I were going to err as a community college, I would err, but they don't look good for them, from my perspective, so it's hard to imagine that those are wrong, but perhaps they are. But it's just curious, the difference, and I don't know why. But please, I do appreciate the legislative post-audit and the work you've done, and I appreciate the time you've spent on this.
Representative Francis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Did you find any evidence, or was it within the scope of your audit to make sure that these student athletic scholarships were being funded by sources not allowed by law?
So we did request data on what were the sources of the funds for specifically athletic scholarships, because by law, they are, you cannot fund athletic scholarships through public sources. And so that information, I'm not sure exactly where. That is in the audit specifically, but it is listed under the scholarships where those sources of those funds were, and they were not from public sources. Those would come mostly from student fees. Like I said, Garden City is 100% from student fees, and the other two colleges funded theirs mostly through student fees. And then there are other sources of funds as well, but they are all not public sources.
This is probably more of a comment than a question. You know, I think the interpretation of this audit has so much to do with the importance of local control. I was lucky enough to be a graduate of a community college, and obviously I'm in a very rural part of the state. And all the time I was at that institution, we did the experiment of having extreme limitations on athletics at the school. And I can just say that as far as getting community support for donors, people interested in the scholarship foundation, school pride, recruitment of both local kids and kids in the area, it was disastrous. They tried it for about 4 years, and after about 4 or 5 seasons of hardly winning a basketball game, it wasn't good at all for the institution.
Maybe they should have been recruiting from my part of the state, but I'm just kidding. We do have a few minutes. We'll invite Heather up to ask questions, and thank you, Maury. Very nice presentation. Welcome, Heather.
Thank you for the opportunity to provide a little bit of a response. I'd like to start with the discrepancy that's being described between the taxpayer transparency database and the audit. The athletic number in the transparency database includes all athletic scholarships. We, community colleges, determine athletic scholarships are for our athletes, for our student athletic trainers, for our student managers, for our student coaches, and for our people who run the PA system, who announce and do those sorts of events, which we call service scholarships, as Maury was mentioning. So the scope of the audit was for certified roster athletes. A certified roster means that you're certifying to the NJCAA that these people are all eligible, and you can only have a certain number of them. So what is reported in the taxpayer transparency database is a much broader category than what is in the audit. So if you're looking at just certified athletics, it's in the audit. If you're looking for all these other ancillary things that it takes to have an athletic program and put on a game, it's the larger number. So as I think Representative Williams was saying, if we were not reporting accurately, you wouldn't report it in the way more, you would report less. So.
No, thank you. And Representative Williams has a question for you.
I do, and they can be super short, so because they kind of like hit right off of each other, so you can be super short in your response. But I'm looking at the response that was provided by the community colleges on this, and it compared it to Division I scholarships, and it specified that your scholarships, community colleges, are so much significantly lower. However, Division I in the state of Kansas uses 0 public funds of any kind. They're all provided outside of that.
That may be true for K-State and KU. It's certainly not true for the regionals.
It's true for majority of all of the regions, according to when I inquired, unless that's changed.
And Division I and Division II, there's a Division I in CAA, there's a Division I and Division II in JCAA. So that might be some of the confusion.
Division I is what I was referencing to, because this is what you referenced in here.
There's a Division I in JCAA, which is different than NCAA Division I. So I don't know if that's some.
Just talking about the 7 major region schools. And there's a difference in those
K-State and KU cover everything with their private athletic corporations. My understanding is that is not the way it is for the others.
Okay,
So I'll ask that you send an email, and it can be distributed for the committee so that we can clarify. Would that be fine? Okay, because we are short on time.
okay, do I have one
Senator
last one?
Williams, please.
All right, last question then. In terms of the public funds, they are allowed to use the fees, which in my opinion, and just for the record, for my community college, it's 98% of those athletes are not from our resident district. For me, that's terribly sad because you just don't have that community support or pride anymore because you don't know any of the kids. And this is happening in all of our community colleges. When you have over 60% of your students, athletes, coming from outside of the state of Kansas, they're not interested. They don't know them. And back when I went to a community college, which I did, my brother played football there. He would have never had a shot at playing football at Butler Community College today because there's not even one athlete from Butler County, or there might be one. And that to me is sad. They had a 10 at that time. They had a requirement of at least that you could have 10 out of state. And now it's completely backwards. So our kids are losing out of this because of the rules. And I know it's not the community college that came up with the rule, but they agreed upon it. But my simple and last question is, when we're talking about public funds and fees can be used, but that's just those fees, that $1.5 million used for scholarships on fees, for example, in one community college, would you agree that if those monies were not used on those scholarships, they could be used on other types of scholarships for in-resident students, or they could be used to lower the mill levy, or they could be used in other ways? It's really just a shift of public funds.
Student fees are not public funds. We would certainly, if there was not athletics at these community colleges, there would be additional student life activities needed to be there. Athletics bring a extra excitement to our campuses, frankly, and attract people from out of state who are going to stay here after the fact. So the student fees, and not everybody uses student fees, some people use auxiliary revenue. Student fees are auxiliary revenue that supports athletics, has been shown to benefit the college. What would happen if we didn't use those fees for athletics, I think, is a local decision to be voted on by each local board. And I will say that we have tremendous community support at community colleges across the state. We have had colleges that have ended athletics, and there would be people filling this room when the baseball team or the track team or the football team was closed. So while there may not be as many athletes from in-county as you would like, we try to get Kansas kids. We get state aid for a Kansas student, so it's actually in our economic best interest to get a Kansas student. We try to get the best Kansas athletes that we can. We recruit hard. We recruit against each other. We recruit against K-State and KU. But then when we don't have a Kansas baseball pitcher, we got to have a pitcher for the baseball team. Then we go to the next best available athlete.
We have another question. Senator Corson.
No, thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to respond to a little bit of what Representative Williams said. I mean, I was a scholarship baseball player at Garden City Community College, and I would just really disagree that there's no interest or investment in these communities, in their athletic teams. I would say that, Butler County has won national championships in football, among other sports. There is tremendous interest in Butler County football and other programs because they are really one of the best programs in the country, and I think that's really appealing to students, to the community. It enriches the student body, and I would just question how much interest there would be from the community if you had an all-in-district football team that was losing every single game, because if you only had kids from in Butler County on the Butler County Community College football team, you would lose every single game. And to what Representative Francis said, I don't think that's really a positive for our schools, for our communities. I mean, we've had kind of a proud tradition in Kansas of having really some of the best community college athletics, men's and women's, in the country. And I think it's a tremendous value. And for a lot of these communities, we talk about quality of life and how do we bring people and keep people in rural communities. For a lot of them, going to sports and athletics is something that they take a great amount of pride in. They don't have the Chiefs or Sporting KC close by that they can go to. So I, again, would just say that, I was attracted to go to Garden City Community College because I knew that they recruited nationally, and I wanted to play against the best competition and with and against the best athletes. And to say that these schools should only be recruiting in district, I would question whether we could even fill rosters and whether we would want to really no longer be competitive at a national level with athletics. And we talk a lot about folks who are leaving the state and how we need to attract and keep young people, particularly college graduates in the state. And I can't think of a better economic development tool than something that is bringing in talented, motivated, driven people to come and get an education in Kansas to develop ties and relationships with the state of Kansas. And many of them, as many of my teammates did who came from out of state, end up staying here and becoming Kansans for life and becoming really productive members of our state and contributing greatly to our economy. So I would just strongly disagree with a lot of what was said by the good representative.
Thank you, Senator. Representative Williams.
Well, I'll be super fast because I know we need to get out of here, Madam Chair. But I would just say statistically, that doesn't bear itself out. Those community colleges in those particular areas, many of them are declining in populations or not gaining as much as their peers. They're 20% or more higher in taxes, property taxes. And in terms of attendance rates, the attendance rates, if you look at it from the last 10 years or last 20 years, they're declining in those particular areas. It doesn't mean that they don't provide a value. I did not say that. What I am saying is that having only 1 or 2% of your students from your resident district is unacceptable, and not recruiting from your local school district is unacceptable.
Thank you, committee. I appreciate the debate. We are out of time. Thank you, Heather. Any information you would like to send the committee, we will be receptive and distribute.
Can I just add one last thing since I didn't really get to my response?
Well, we are out of time, but I'm sorry. Could you email it to the committee?
Certainly would, but I would just say that what the last statement about all of our rural communities that are declining, that's not true. Colby Community College has been increasing in enrollment, so.
Okay, thank you. We do have another item on the agenda, committee. Yes, quickly. Thank you. Thank you, Kristen.
No problem. I will keep it very, very short today. So on the consent calendar, which you can find in tab A, we just have one item today, which is acceptance of the performance audits that were presented today. So that would include the Capers audit that Cade presented and the community college athletics audit that Maury just presented as well. So unless there's objection from the committee, those items would be considered accepted.
Committee, are there any objections? And Senator Reddy, would you like to recuse yourself since you were not on the, okay, she will recuse herself. Is there any objection from the other members? Seeing none, approved. Is there any, okay, we'll wait, okay.
Open your notebooks to tab B and rip out the sheet. That is the list of upcoming meeting dates. No meeting next week. The next meeting is February 21st, which will be the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Kansas Universities and foreign spending, or foreign contributions, and a rehash of 911 briefer version.
Wonderful, thank you. Committee, is there any other business? Seeing none, we're adjourned. Thank you.